Hey folks, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night. This is Paul talking about A Course in Miracles on a Saturday afternoon. Thought I'd talk about atonement because I need some atonement. So what is the atonement anyway? Well, there's some parts in the Course that may have been taken out that they're in there talking about the fall of man and about the separation and how initially souls separated from heaven and fell into this belief in the separation idea, and if they just would have been willing to see the error of their ways, it says that the angels could have helped them. But the problem was that they weren't interested in peace. So it's like they went into separation ideas, became separate, started believing in it, and they could have been sort of talked around and returned back to the sonship, but didn't want to. They were unwilling, so the angels couldn't help them. They couldn't show them the truth because they just didn't want it. I forgot to start this off by saying, Holy Spirit, please help me, speak for me, guide me, help me to know what to say. So what was needed then was the sons of God had used their beliefs as defenses against the truth instead of in support of the truth. Like, instead of upholding the truth, they used their defending abilities to defend against it and to use it for attack as a weapon. So then what needed to happen was there needed to be a defense that was pure enough and true enough that it couldn't be used for attack. That, I think it says, if it was used at all. So like, there's this atonement principle that comes into being that if you choose and elect to use it, it can defend against the separation without attacking, and sort of support and uphold the truth without forcing anyone to have to do it. And so the atonement principle was put in place. The Holy Spirit came into his role as the answer to the separation, and this happened in the instant that the separation idea occurred. The atonement, it says, the atonement began long before the resurrection, even before Jesus' lifetime. It began, and the curriculum began way back at the beginning of the separation, because God fixed it right at the instant that it happened. And the truth is that God did successfully, and could only be successfully correct the problem by implementing the curriculum and the atonement, and putting the atonement principle into the separation idea. Jesus says he put it into the space-time belief in order to put a limit on the belief that there would be a plan and a way to get the souls to come back home and to reach this state of atonement in which they are healed and can return to the sonship and back to heaven. And so there is an atonement plan which spans more than one individual and entails and requires that each individual soul, each mind, chooses the atonement for themselves. And this is why it says that your only responsibility is to accept the atonement for yourself. And the yourself part is key. It's not that you're accepting it as the one Son of God. It's that you're accepting it, the responsibility of accepting it for you in spite of others not accepting it. And that's why Jesus accepted it for himself and is now in a state of perfect holiness in heaven and having nothing that God didn't give him. And that's why you now remain in a state of the potential to be where he's at, but are not yet there, at least in time, that you haven't yet accepted the atonement for yourself. And also, in accepting the atonement, you accept it for the whole sonship, because you can't really accept the truth in isolation. You accept it. You accept that it applies everywhere to all brothers and is true of everyone. So when it says that when he shared it, when he accepted it, he had to also share it. And in the sharing of it, in the giving of it to the sonship, he accepted it for himself and received it. It's kind of like you receive miracles in order to give them. You can only give the miracles you receive. So it's not a selfish act. It's accepting the atonement isn't like the one Son accepts the atonement and then it's done, which quite a lot of people believe, that it's just going to be, if I just accept it, then I can forget about the world and everybody else can go fuck themselves. And it becomes selfish, because there are in actuality other selves, other beings, other souls, brothers who also need to accept it. So then the atonement plan, which Jesus talks about, may span millions of years, and who knows what that time window refers to when it started. This plan is something that spans not just yourself, but also all of the other children of God that went into the separation. And so the plan entails you become part of the atonement. You become, it says when you accept the atonement, you now become part of the atonement yourself, part of the overall correcting of the separation. You now serve as someone who now guides and helps and heals and gives and extends miracles and teaches and so on, that you now become part of the Great Crusade, whose slogan is listen, learn, and do. Listen to my voice, learn to undo the error, and do something to correct it. And the first two are not enough, that you have to actually apply forgiveness and miracles and do. Did I just see a little thingy there? And hey angels, welcome to the vehicle. Oh, there goes another one. So the plan is bigger than just your own atonement, because now you become part of this plan and you now participate in the Great Crusade to bring about the completion of the plan. And the plan is this really big long-term thing that involves all individuals, where you now help, you become part of the help to undo the separation by helping your brothers. And as Jesus says, you become unwilling to tolerate lack of love in others, and you must join the Great Crusade to correct it. And it's not really that you even have the option not to, because by reaching the atonement and getting to a place of love, you become fully willing that the truth is true and you want it to apply to everyone, and you naturally desire to help those that you know are still suffering and believing in illusions. So you now naturally fulfill your function, and this is where it says that atonement is the natural profession of the children of God. So now you take up your position as a physician of the Lord, as a disciple of Jesus, as a professor of atonement, and you he says, those that profess me. He's reminding me of all this stuff here, just having all these flashes of quotes. Those who profess me, you express Jesus' miracles, Christ's miracles. You profess the truth. You teach only love. You communicate healing in the world. This is part of the plan of atonement. And your function on earth is healing. You share the Holy Spirit's function on earth as your function in heaven is creation. So there's your atonement, but there's also this bigger atonement plan that is a collaborative venture where you are serving to fulfill the needs of the overall scooping up of everyone and bringing everyone back home to heaven with you. This is all kind of being told to me as I talk. So what is this atonement? What is your atonement? What is it to atone? What does it mean to accept the atonement? What is this defense that doesn't attack? What is the truth, says Jesus? It's the truth. He says, denial takes you away from it. I'm just going to let Jesus talk to you. The atonement plan was put in place in order that all the souls can return to God in one piece. There is nothing to fear because in reality nothing has happened. God knows that this is true of his Son, and he has been protected from all harm, and nothing can hurt him in any way. There is no need to consider that something must be done in the sense that nothing has happened. However, since you believe in dreams and illusions, which must be undone in order for you to return to awareness of the truth, the full truth and nothing but the truth, there does appear to be a plan and a progression towards the ultimate truth that there is nothing left to do, a state of forgiveness which recognizes there has been no sin, and therefore correction has already established the truth, and the truth is true. Forgiveness can be said to be the same thing as atonement. It is the state of being in which you recognize there is nothing to forgive because you see correctly and you recognize that illusions are false and only the truth is true. And in your recognition, you know, it's clear as plain as day that there is nothing for you to be upset about. There is no sin happening. There is no separation. It is unreal, and it is recognized as false, and therefore it does not really exist. To accept the truth is the end of denial. In denial, you are attempting to assert that the truth is not true, and this places you in states of insanity where you find yourself to be unforgiven and suffering and experiencing the hell of your making. And in this state, you will find death and sickness and all things that you would rather not occur even though you're choosing them. In order for you to return to sanity, as it were, you must open up to accept that the truth that you believe in is not really the truth that God has established. It does not line up with His will, and it was something you made to substitute for the truth and persuade you away from heaven. It is that which keeps you anchored in hell and unwilling to return to God. These denials, these blocks to awareness, must be removed from your mind so that you are fully conscious of the fact that the truth is true and nothing else is true. It is when you think that something else is true other than the truth that you go into all states of suffering, sickness, and death. These illusions cannot be real because the truth is always true, and the truth being true certifies, guarantees, and establishes that you cannot really be doing what you think you're doing. And it is this that the atonement establishes as the permanent fact of reality, that God has Himself proven that the truth has still remained true in spite of your denial of it. I will continue. Acceptance or denial are the only choice available to you from your vantage point and position of being inside a realm where you have chosen, and therefore must choose against the choices that you've made that have taken you away from a state where there is no real choice. I hope this is not confusing to you. It simply means that choose again in order to choose the fact that there is no alternative to reality. God's truth is the only truth. Life is the only reality. Death is an illusion. All forms of death, sickness, suffering, unhappiness, grievance, guilt, are simply states of being that are false, where you have manufactured illusions that you pass off as the truth and believe in as if they're real. And because of this, you are not accepting the atonement and are not accepting God. This unacceptance is an unwillingness, which is why A Course in Miracles states that you must have at least a little willingness in order to be willing to question whether or not that which you have established as true is actually true, to open yourself up to the possibility that you may be mistaken, and perhaps you've made an error in judgment. Perhaps you've come to a conclusion that is false and have been thinking that it's correct because of the lack of information that has come about as a result of your denial of the truth. Once the blocks to awareness and the denial of the truth are willingly let go, surrendered, you now become willing to recognize the truth for what it is, rather than believe the truth is something it's not. And in exchanging truth for lies, you have deceived yourself to the belief that God is not real, that life is death, that heaven is hell, and that you want something else. And so the only challenge for you now is to learn to distinguish between illusions of truth and actual facts, the underlying metaphysical truth that only God is real and nothing else is real. This may take some time, which is why there is a curriculum. and why you have lessons to learn and things to undo and activities to perform. This purification process can lead you to the undoing of the separation simply by a willingness to be mistaken about what you thought was correct, to receive correction, and therefore to receive the truth. Admitting the truth allows you to gain access to the truth so that the truth can come into you, join with you, be where you are, and shine a light upon your mind, correcting its illusions and dispelling myths and false beliefs. This is why miracles intercede for your holiness by injecting life-giving truth reality into your mind, breaking up the illusions and cancelling out the errors that your perception is making as a result of your confusion. In your willingness to accept the truth, you are becoming willing to open yourself up to a truth that is greater than the truth you had before, more encompassing, more whole, more inclusive, a truth that doesn't exclude, doesn't separate, doesn't leave out, doesn't reject, doesn't make dark, and doesn't hide error from correction. When you keep things in the dark, they remain evidence of your belief in sin, that sin is real. By bringing them into the light, you are simply becoming willing to allow them to be questioned, to be examined, to be looked at, to be shone away, to be realized for what they actually are and not what they seem to be when you were not seeing them in the light. And in the light of truth, there is a dispelling of myths. There is a darkness that is shone away. There is a clarification and enlightenment. And therefore, the atonement could be said to be enlightenment in a state in which you are recognizing the truth is true and that nothing else is true. In your sorting out of distinguishing between true and false, you come to a clarity about God's truth versus ego truth, and you become willing only to abide by the laws of God, to operate in the laws of God, to express from the laws of God, and therefore to break all ego laws, to demonstrate and prove through miracles that there is no truth in the illusions of causality of this world, that the ego's pretense that you're bound by form and limited by matter are fiction. When you have examined and undone your belief in lies and illusions and things that distract you from the truth and decoys and misrepresentations and things masquerading as facts which are fiction, and are willing to let go of your belief in these things, recognizing that they are false, clearly distinguishing that they're not true and they never really were, you will become willing, therefore, to accept atonement because now you recognize that you don't have any other reason not to. There is no objection. There is nothing else pulling at your heartstrings, telling you to uphold some other truth or stay allegiant to something else that seems more true to you. Once you have fully clarified that all false things are false and recognize them as such, as illusions, they will disappear, and all that will remain is the obvious only choice and direction that your mind can go, which is to the atonement truth, whereby you now acknowledge that there is nothing else to accept. There is nothing else to choose. There is nothing else that can be true. This must be the only truth. And in this obviousness, willingness, and acceptance, you now surrender all objection and lay down your ego and simply allow this truth to be the fact of reality, to be your reality, and now you accept the atonement. It is the acceptance that only the truth is true as God established it. There is nothing else. There is no world. There is no body. There is no time or space. There is only creation, only heaven, only life. And this willingness to accept this places you in a condition whereby God now himself can continue your uninterrupted creation, which has never ceased, has not been interrupted, has always been true, and has not been affected by your dark dreams. Now you enter into heaven and you are one with him, resuming awareness of the fact that you always were, that literally nothing has really happened. You were mistaken for believing that you could separate, that you had done so, when in truth you could not and you didn't. It was only your mistaken belief that you were able to, and that you had done so, as a false belief that must be corrected. You are not undoing a real separation. You are not undoing an actual consequence. You are only undoing your belief that you could do something that's impossible and that you have not done. This is the atonement. You have not done what you think you have done. You have not done it. It has not occurred. In reality, in truth. You simply are confused, hallucinating, believing that you're capable and accomplished in performing an attack on reality that you cannot accomplish. And so the only truth is that you have not really done it, you just think you have. And it is only the thinking that you have that is undone in the atonement, because the truth remains that you never really did it anyway. This is the peace in which God recognizes nothing real can be threatened, nothing real has been threatened. The threat isn't real. Nothing unreal exists. I will pass you over to Paul now. Thank you for listening. Kind of cool how the sun is shining its holiness. That was Jesus talking. That was me channeling Jesus with as minimal interference as I could muster. I think he's kind of covered everything I was going to say. I was particularly going to home in on the part at the end there, because there's something that I realized only just recently that really gives a lot of clarity. The fact that in truth you cannot sin, you can't actually change God, you cannot produce effects in your Creator. You can't attack reality. You cannot change the truth. This is the atonement truth. It's a fact. It's absolutely impossible to actually separate, to actually sin, to actually attack. And that means that you literally haven't done it. You actually could not do it. You didn't do so. It has not happened. God hasn't changed. The truth hasn't changed. You haven't actually sinned. There hasn't been any real consequences. You have not killed the Son of God, and nothing's occurred. This is absolute permanent fact. I'm spitting everywhere. It's permanent fact that this is true, and it's always true, and it's always been true. It never stopped being true. The only thing that's happened in the separation idea, mad idea, the dream of death, is that there was this idea that you could do these things, that you actually could attack reality, you could change God's mind, you could affect him, you could make him dead, that you could kill the Son of God, and having this idea and then believing in it. Instead of laughing at it and remembering that it's ridiculous and impossible, you now observe this idea and then you think, even though it is absolutely freaking ridiculous, there's no way that it's true, that you would forget to laugh at it and now go into believing in it and trying to invest in this idea, to try to make it be true, to try to give it reality, to try to turn it into a truth and an experience that you're convinced by, as if it's actually occurring and you're doing it and you've had these consequences, that you actually are separating from God, that you're actually causing real attack and change and effects in God, and that you really are a sinner. So all that you do is you go from this position of it's literally impossible to separate and to attack God, to change the truth, and so you go into denial of this fact that you cannot do anything about the truth, and you pretend that you can. You make up a dream, a fiction, in which you believe in, believing that you have sinned, that you are sinning, that you're a sinner, that you've done something, that it's really occurring, that it's real, and it's having real consequences, and that this is all real, and it's happening and occurring, and all it is, it's this little bubble of nonsense and insanity, totally not having any effect on reality and truth whatsoever. This is why it says not one note in heaven's song was skipped. Because the fact is that all that's happened is that you've become mistaken. You just have believed that something is true that isn't, which is the state of believing that illusions are the reality. That it's kind of like, I liken it to, you think that you commit a crime. In reality, noisy. You think that you do some kind of crime, like you think, oh, I attacked someone, and it happens so fast that you see it incorrectly, and you turn away and you think that you saw yourself cause a murder or something, and then you run away in horror, believing that you actually did cause harm, and now you live with this horrendous belief in that you really sinned, and you're guilty, and you deserve punishment, and you should die and suffer and can never go home and never can be forgiven, all believing that you actually did hurt someone, when in fact onlookers at the same scene saw that the fact was true, that you actually didn't hurt anyone, and it sort of happened so quickly that you didn't get a proper view of it, and you came to a false conclusion, and you sort of misperceived that you had done something terrible, when in fact everyone looking at the scene saw that actually no, you actually didn't. You didn't really hurt that person. You didn't murder. You didn't attack. They're totally fine. Nothing happened to them. They are invulnerable and nothing changed. So now you've gone off into this belief that you have done something that you actually haven't done. This is the entire separation idea, that you're something is true that isn't true. Something impossible has become possible. Something unreal has taken on reality. Something that you cannot do, you're doing. Something that you did not do, you did do. So that means everything to do with what you're doing inside this world, in this dream of death separation, is just you being mistaken. It's not, this isn't real separation. It is just you being confused and mistaken, believing that you're doing something that you're not doing, that something is true that isn't, that you did sin when you didn't, and that you're just sort of in a state of remorse and guilt and attacking yourself and making yourself sick and suffering and dying and hurting yourself, all for no reason. Having not really actually done anything to reality, that you're just mistaken about all of these beliefs that you've sinned. You're just mistaken about it. You haven't actually sinned. You're not really guilty. You don't deserve to be punished. You don't deserve to die, because you haven't actually done what you think you've done. You just think you have. You just have this mistaken belief in. You've put this tremendous weight of believing in and trying to convince yourself and trying to make it true, trying to give it reality. This is what it means by making it real. That you've tried to turn something that isn't true into truth. You tried to turn something that isn't real into reality. And so now you're in this position where you just need to kind of be talked around to understand that you haven't done what you think you've done. I just had a little glimpse of Atonement there. I was about to cry. That you haven't, that you're just kind of like a confused child that is crying and desperate and upset because they think that they've done something really terrible and bad and serious. And here comes the angels to comfort the child and to sort of try to reassure them, no, you haven't done that. It's okay. You didn't hurt anyone. It's not serious. You don't have to be upset, and you don't need to be hard on yourself, because look, everything's fine. God is still whole. Reality is intact. The sonship is still whole. Your soul has not been affected. You're just confused. You're just mistaken. You didn't really sin. You're just mistaken in believing that you have. And this is why this is the difference between sin and error, or that sin is the idea that you really actually have separated, and recognizing that it's just an error, that errors can be corrected, that you've made this error in judgment in believing that you could and did separate. You're believing in a lie, it's an illusion, and you're thinking it's true, but it's just an error. It's that you were in error to believe that you could do what you think you've done. You're in error to believe that you can sin and that you've done so. And that you actually haven't. You actually have not really sinned. There is no real sin. That was one of the lines in the Course. I remember reading it the first time I read it. There is no sin. And you just feel this relief because it's true. It's just healing to just even hear that. There is no sin. There is no death. So basically all the Holy Spirit and the angels and so on, Jesus and other helpers are trying to do as professors of atonement they're just trying to get you to see that all of this hallucinating and believing and being upset and suffering and thinking that you have to die and becoming sick and all this bad stuff, it need not be. It doesn't have to happen. It shouldn't be happening. You don't need to do this. You don't need to make yourself hurt. You don't need to suffer. It is not God's will that you suffer. And you're trying to make yourself suffer for something that you haven't really done in reality. A fake sin, a false crime, a mistaken view of effects that are not real. You haven't done what you think you've done. You're actually innocent. And this is the core of the atonement is the recognition and acceptance and acknowledgement of your perfect innocence, that you're so holy and so innocent that you couldn't even possibly in reality even conceive of real attack and real sin. There's no way that you could do them because you're innocent. You're like permanently locked in to a state of perfect holiness, which makes it impossible for you to sin. So you haven't sinned. You just believe that you have. That's the whole problem. This entire separation dream is a mistaken belief. It is an error in judgment. It is an error that you've made. You haven't made truth. You've made a mistake. You haven't made reality. You've made an error. You've tried to do something that's impossible. And as the Course says, the world you see, it's the world you see that is impossible. This world cannot be reality or truth because it depicts sin. It's based on the idea of separation. It's made of illusions of things seeming to be real and true that aren't. It is impossible. This world is impossible because if it were possible, there has been a separation, and God has been changed, and reality has been converted into hell. And that's why there's no world. This is all part of the atonement teaching, that quite literally, reality as heaven, as the Holy Trinity, is the only thing that is ever real. Nothing else ever becomes real. That is the only truth, the permanent reality. It never changes. Nothing can attack it. You haven't attacked it. Heaven is the only thing that remains. Heaven remains the one alternative to the strange world that you made in your believing that there could be a world other than the kingdom of God. It's an error. It's a false belief. This is not really a world. It is an illusion. This world is an illusion of a world. God did not create it. What he creates must be eternal as himself. So the teaching then is that this world literally isn't really here. It is unreality, it's illusion. And recognizing that that's true and actually experientially perceiving that this world now registers to your mind as unreal, that when you look at it, you don't believe in it, and it becomes transparent and it becomes obvious that it just can't be true. It just is false. Nothing in it is true. There's no truth out there in the world. The teachers of God choose to look on dreams a while, but they're not deceived by what they see. So now you sort of stay in the dream temporarily as a teacher of God and as part of the atonement plan, and now you're helping your brothers to come to the atonement with you, but still not deceived by the lie that there has really been a separation, or that this world really is existing, and the recognition that all of these illusions of differences and forms and errors and death and broken things and sickness isn't true. It can't be true because it's not the same as God's truth. God's truth is eternal life, that everything is always the same. Reality is a constant state, nothing ever changes. So if that's true, things die, things always change, nothing's ever the same, blah, 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 cannot be the truth. So in all of your purification work and your undoing and your healing, eventually you get to the place where you've withdrawn your investment and your faith in the ego. You no longer listen to its voice. You don't believe separation, illusion, lies, and now you are ready to it becomes obvious that only God's truth must be true then, because nothing else is true. And it becomes the only choice, the only possibility, the acceptance that it is only the truth is true. And then you accept it. Then you're willing to accept it, because if you have even a tiny trace of belief in illusions and ego and I really did sin and I'm really guilty, you won't be willing to accept the atonement. You'll feel as though I'm not quite sure, I'm not quite committed, it doesn't quite seem true, because I have something else that I'm holding on to that seems to be true that I don't want to let go of. And that will prevent you from being willing to accept the atonement. You have to have no desire to keep the ego, to keep the world. This world holds nothing that I want. Teachers of God will be happy to give up all the pleasures of the world. And then you only do that by not believing in anything that is false. If you believe things that aren't true, it will keep you from willingness, and it will not allow you to accept the real truth. So you got to figure out what really is in alignment with God's will, what is in accord with His laws, what is matching the atonement truth, and only be choosing, desiring, willing, believing in that, so that you are fully willing. Not just a little willingness that gets you toward it, but now fully willing, 100% willfulness to accept that truth. And then you accept it, and then you're done. And now you return to the awareness that you've always been the same in heaven, that you've never changed. I'm still as God created me. God's truth is still true. Heaven's song is still continued, and nothing has ever changed reality. That there wasn't even a slight interruption to heaven's song. Creation is still extending unlimited, and all your creations still exist. And now you're in heaven with God, happy. I think I'm going to stop there because I'm cold. Need some lunch. So that's kind of an overview of the atonement and why it means what it means, and why you've got to learn. This is why you learn that forgiveness is to do with realizing that you haven't done what you think you've done, that someone hasn't really hurt you, that you have not experienced suffering. It's not real. Sickness isn't real. Attack and death aren't real. And choosing to believe and recognize that that's true. Jesus says in the book, atonement and salvation and forgiveness are all names for the same thing. They're all this one state of perfect recognition of who you are as Christ and what God is as permanent truth, and the total relief and happiness at realizing that you are still just as holy and innocent as you always were, and have never really sinned, and therefore you're willing to accept and receive God's love. You're willing to allow God to love you, and now you receive. And it's in that receiving moment, in the atonement, that you receive miracles and healing, and it becomes part of your truth. And now you're able to give that truth to others in the atonement plan. It's the privilege of the forgiven to forgive, that because you've now forgiven yourself and accepted some atonement, you can now extend this healed, love-filled, life-giving mind stuff to another, to heal them and restore them and help them to reach the atonement. Through miracles, performing miracles. Healing is when two minds recognize their oneness and become glad. So there's the atonement, kind of a overview, I guess, and so it's just willingness and acceptance and getting rid of denial and becoming able to recognize the truth. Enlightenment is but a recognition, not a change at all. It's just remembering. Jesus says it's remembering and recalling and recognizing, having cognition of, awareness of, knowing of what the truth really is. And in that acknowledgement, you ascend to heaven and resume what you've always been forever, having eternal life. Yes. Job done. Love you. See you next time, and bye.